What was the strangest gut feeling that ended up saving you? This one is weird and a bit spooky. When I was around 10 years old, me, my mom, and my sister had gone to pick up a new propane canister from the store. After that, we were heading to a strip mall to get haircuts. While we were in the turning lane waiting to pull into the shopping center, my mom popped a cigarette into her mouth. She was just about to strike the lighter. Suddenly, my sister looked at her and said, "Mom, we're here. What's the point?" That in and of itself was completely out of character for my sister, but for my mom to actually listen to her and put the cigarette away, in retrospect, that was absolutely ludicrous. But listen, she did. About 10 minutes later, we were sitting inside the salon. Suddenly, everyone starts looking out the window, rubbernecking. A fire truck, full lights blazing and sirens screaming, came ripping into the parking lot. We realized pretty quick that they were surrounding my mom's car. Apparently, someone had called 911. They reported a heavy smell of propane, and they identified that it was pouring out of our vehicle. We rushed outside, but the first responders kept us pushed back, away from the vehicle. We explained it was our car, and we handed them the keys so they could get inside. After a couple minutes of evaluation, the firefighters came back to us. They explained that the tank had a major critical leak, and they had to dispose of it immediately. That's when the gravity of the situation hit us like a ton of bricks. My sister had stopped my mom from lighting up. We told the firefighters the story, and the look on their faces was a lot. The head fireman looked a bit unsteady. He looked my mom dead in the eye and told her that based on the size of the leak, after just 5 minutes of the gas escaping, we had essentially created a rolling bomb. We had been trapped inside that car for 5 to 7 minutes after picking up the canister. He explained that if she had lit that cigarette, we would have exploded right there in the turning lane. Really wild stuff. Thanks, Cal. You saved our asses. Cultural note. Propane is naturally odorless. Manufacturers intentionally add a chemical compound called ethyl mercaptan to give it a distinct, pungent smell similar to rotten eggs or sulfur. This safety regulation was widely implemented in the United States after the 1937 New London School explosion, ensuring that average citizens can immediately detect hazardous gas leaks before a catastrophe occurs. One afternoon back in kindergarten, my lunch kit included my dad's heavy-duty work thermos. It was this sleek charcoal gray container, and I was honestly so proud to use it. It felt like a badge of honor to carry something that was usually reserved just for adults, instead of my usual childish plastic cartoon character bottles. When the lunch bell finally rang, the entire classroom pulled out their lunch boxes and drinks. But as I was setting up my spot, my clumsy hands knocked the heavy thermos right off the edge of the table. It hit the hard linoleum floor with a loud metallic thud. I quickly picked it up and placed it back on the table, checking for dents. That's when I noticed something pretty neat. Even after spending hours inside my backpack at school, the ice inside was still completely frozen. I could distinctly hear it clinking and shifting around whenever I moved the container. For some strange, inexplicable reason, I became completely obsessed with getting my teacher's attention. I just had this overwhelming urge to show her how the ice was still floating perfectly inside my drink. She was busy managing a room full of hyperactive kids, so she understandably wasn't as excited as I was. She casually blew me off a few times, telling me to just sit down and eat, but something inside me wouldn't let it go. I kept nagging her, over and over again, practically begging her to look inside. Finally, she relented with a sigh and walked over, unscrewing the heavy cap to look at my oh-so-exciting drink. The second the lid came off, her entire face went pale. She quickly yanked the thermos away from my view, her eyes wide with sudden panic. She grabbed my shoulder and asked me if I had taken a sip yet. I told her I hadn't, but I was deeply confused by her reaction. She then turned the thermos slightly and explained the horror of what she was looking at. That old-school thermos wasn't insulated with thick plastic. It was lined with a double wall of vacuum glass. When I dropped it, that inner glass liner had completely shattered into hundreds of razor-sharp needles. The icy clinking noise I was hearing wasn't frozen cubes at all. It was a deadly slurry of floating glass shards. To this day, I still don't understand why I kept nagging her so aggressively to see my dumb thermos. I was usually a quiet kid who hated bothering adults, but looking back, it's absolutely terrifying to imagine what would have happened if I had just taken one big thirsty gulp from that broken glass trap. Cultural note: classic vacuum flasks, famously manufactured by brands like Stanley or Aladdin throughout the 20th century, relied on a revolutionary double-walled glass container design invented by Scottish physicist James Dewar. This system utilized a vacuum space between the walls to completely prevent thermal transfer. While highly effective at keeping liquids hot or cold, these internal glass filler components were incredibly fragile and prone to shattering upon hard impacts, which eventually led modern manufacturers to replace them with stainless steel liners for safety reasons. This happened about 14 years ago, during one of my usual night shifts as a pizza delivery driver. Back then, it was a completely different game. Smartphone apps didn't exist, so delivering pizzas was strictly a cash-heavy business. Every driver walked around with a pocket full of bills, making us easy targets. It was right around midnight when 2 late-night orders came into the shop. The first stop was in a notoriously sketchy neighborhood, and the second was just a quarter-mile down the road at a completely different apartment complex. I pulled up to the first address, stepping out into the freezing midnight air. The guy who answered the door seemed incredibly odd, twitchy and nervous, but he paid for the food and I turned back toward my car. That's when things started going wrong. Out of nowhere, 3 guys rolled up on me, blocking my path in the dark. They started asking me supposedly innocent casual questions, just trying to keep me talking. Every instinct in my body told me to run. My heart was hammering against my ribs, but not wanting to provoke them or cause a scene, I kept my answers short, concise, and quickly pushed past them to get to my vehicle. I threw the car into drive and headed straight to the next stop. But that uneasy, vulnerable feeling was already burning in the back of my mind. An unexplainable, suffocating wave of dread told me that the situation wasn't over. When I reached the second apartment complex, my anxiety spiked. Because of the layout, I had to park my car pretty far away, leaving it completely isolated while I walked all the way around the building to find the customer's door. By now, I was on absolute high alert. Every tiny shadow looked like a threat. My gut was practically screaming at me to get out of there. I didn't just walk. I literally sprinted to the door, slammed the food into the customer's hands, grabbed the cash, and booked it back to my car at full speed. I jumped into the driver's seat, slammed the lock button, and cranked the ignition, throwing the gear shifter straight into reverse. But the exact moment I looked up, my chest went completely numb. Those exact same 3 guys from the first house had followed me. They were already surrounding my car in the pitch-black parking lot, and one of them was staring directly at me, pressing the cold metal barrel of a gun right against my side window. They were there to rob me by any means necessary. They had obviously gotten cold feet during their first attempt, and used those innocent questions to stall me while they set up a deadlier trap. I didn't think, I just reacted. I floored the gas pedal in reverse, screeching the tires, then violently slammed it into first gear, hauling absolute ass out of that parking lot. As I sped away, I ducked my entire body below the dashboard, steering blindly, just waiting to hear the terrifying sound of bullets shattering through the glass. They didn't shoot, but that experience scarred me for a very long time. I never looked at a midnight delivery the same way again. Cultural note. During the mid-2000s, pizza delivery drivers in the United States faced an exceptionally high rate of targeted armed robberies due to the industry's heavy reliance on cash transactions. Before the widespread adoption of digital mobile payment systems and GPS tracking, criminals frequently utilized phony orders or low-income apartment complexes to set up ambushes, taking advantage of poorly lit parking zones and the predictable nature of delivery routes. I used to work as a chemical operator for a heavy industrial facility that manufactured high-purity sulfuric acid reagents and other extremely corrosive compounds. At the time, I was responsible for training a new hire, teaching him the ropes for about 3 months. On this particular shift, we were working on a section of the plant that was honestly pretty straightforward. All we had to do was inspect the chemical lines and slowly open a major valve. Because the task was so routine, most of the experienced operators in the plant usually skipped the full-body personal protective equipment, just pure laziness. And to be fair, the company didn't exactly have the strictest safety standards. People cut corners constantly. But as we approached the line, this sudden, heavy feeling of unease hit me in the gut. It wasn't just about setting a good example for the rookie. It was a weird, urgent instinct that something out of the ordinary could go wrong. A voice in my head insisted that we could not skip a single protocol, not today. "We're putting on the full gear," I told the new guy, ignoring the usual complaints about how hot and uncomfortable the suits were. We buckled up, completely sealing ourselves inside the heavy, full-body chemical suits, masks, and thick gloves. It turned out to be the most important decision of our lives. Unknown to us, someone on the previous shift had completely fucked up the process, creating a massive, undetected pressure buildup inside the system. The exact moment I turned the handle to open the valve, the pressure spiked. A thick glass hole cover right in front of our faces literally exploded into pieces. A massive, high-pressure wave of concentrated sulfuric acid sprayed everywhere, covering both of us from head to toe in a burning, corrosive deluge. If I had listened to the lazy culture of the shop, our skin and eyes would have melted off in seconds. But thankfully, because of that sudden intuition, we were fully protected. I grabbed the terrified rookie and dragged him straight to the emergency deluge shower, rinsing each other off as the acid hissed against the protective material. Upper management praised me for weeks for following the safety standards, but I knew the truth. It was a blind, stubborn gut feeling that saved us from a lifetime of horrific scars. Cultural note. Concentrated sulfuric acid reagents are highly exothermic when reacting with moisture, capable of causing severe third-degree chemical burns and permanent blindness upon contact. In industrial chemical plants, glass sight glasses or hole covers are utilized to visually monitor fluid levels, but they represent a critical vulnerability point if pressure regulations fail due to upstream operational errors or poor maintenance of relief valves. Back in February of 2021, I was working the grueling night shifts as a long-haul truck driver. Anyone in the industry knows how brutal that schedule is. You literally live and die by your sleep routine. During the daytime, I used to park my rig and sleep right inside the back cab, fully enclosed by heavy, thick fabric curtains to block out the blinding afternoon sun. On this particular afternoon, For absolutely no logical reason at all, I suddenly jolted wide awake. It wasn't a slow, peaceful drift into consciousness. My eyes just snapped open, and my heart was pounding. I checked the clock. It was early afternoon, way earlier than my usual wake-up time. Honestly, I was furious. I lay there in the dark cab, deeply annoyed because my sleep schedule was completely ruined, and I absolutely needed to be well rested to drive a massive truck all through the upcoming night. I tried closing my eyes again, trying to force myself back to sleep, completely unable to understand why this weird, unexplainable surge of adrenaline had forced me awake. Then about 5 or 10 minutes later, something impossible happened. Out of nowhere, my windshield wiper suddenly switched on and started scraping against the dry glass. I froze. My keys were completely out of the ignition, sitting right there on the dashboard. Mathematically and mechanically, it was 100% impossible for those wipers to activate without power. I pulled back the heavy sleeping curtains to investigate, and that's when I heard a bizarre, terrifying sound. A distinct crackling and cackling noise coming from the front dashboard. A second later, a thick, acrid wave of dark smoke started pouring out of the air vents. Panic instantly set in. I scrambled in the dark, blindly throwing on whatever clothes I could grab, and reached for the door handle. Within literally 3 seconds, the entire cab filled with choking, blinding smoke. As I opened the door and leaped out onto the asphalt, I looked back inside. An intense, bright orange glow was already consuming the interior. The fire had originated deep inside the main fuse box, melting straight through the plastic dashboard. It had already spread to the exact spot where my fabric sleeping curtains had been hanging just seconds before. I grabbed my heavy onboard fire extinguisher, pulled the pin, and desperately sprayed the flames until the fire was completely snuffed out. Under normal circumstances, I could sleep through World War III, especially after working a brutal night shift. I have absolutely no logical explanation for what forced me to jolt awake that afternoon. But if I hadn't listened to that sudden, uncomfortable gut feeling that ripped me out of my sleep, I never would have woken up again. The toxic smoke would have suffocated me before the fire even touched my skin. Cultural note: in commercial heavy-duty trucks manufactured during the late 2010s and early 2020s, a severe electrical short circuit within the primary power distribution center, or fuse box, can cause a phenomenon known as parasitic backfeeding. This occurs when melting insulation causes live power wires to fuse with accessory ground wires, unintentionally completing a circuit that can activate high-draw electrical components, such as windshield wipers or blowers, even when the ignition switch is entirely off and the key is removed. My boyfriend was driving me back home late at night. We were flying down those dark, narrow back roads, trying our absolute best to make it before my strict curfew. The night was completely quiet, just the hum of the engine and the headlights cutting through the pitch black. Out of nowhere, this sudden freezing chill rushed down my spine. It wasn't just a cold breeze. It was a violent, suffocating wave of pure panic that gripped my entire body. Without even thinking, I screamed at the top of my lungs, "Hit the brakes!" He didn't hesitate. He slammed his foot down. The tires screeched violently against the asphalt, and we skidded to a hard, abrupt stop, our seatbelts locking up tightly against our chests. Right at that exact microsecond, 6 massive heavy deer emerged from the thick tree line, leaping directly into the beam of our headlights. If we had kept going at that speed, our tiny Honda Civic would have been completely obliterated, and the impact easily could have taken our lives. A few weeks later, it happened again. We were taking the same dark back roads, which eventually require us to pull out and turn onto a major high-speed state road. It was pitch black, and I could see the headlights of a single car approaching in the far distance. Mechanically speaking, we had time to pull out in front of them, plenty of time. My boyfriend was about to hit the gas, but that exact same heavy dread settled deep in my gut. "No, wait," I blurted out. "I have a really bad feeling about this." He looked at me, confused, but he held the brake. We sat there in absolute silence, waiting as the lone car finally passed right in front of us. Once they were ahead, we pulled out safely and drove behind them. Not even a mile down the highway, the oncoming headlights of a massive pickup truck suddenly went wild. The driver pulled a random, chaotic U-turn, straight out of a movie, swerving violently across the median. The heavy truck T-boned the exact car in front of us at full speed, metal twisting and glass shattering everywhere. The truck driver was completely wasted. My boyfriend was absolutely terrified, staring at the wreckage in front of us. He is my husband now, and to this very day he never questions me when I tell him that something feels off. It has saved our butts more times than I can count. Cultural note. In the United States, secondary infrastructure and rural state routes often lack sufficient overhead lighting and wildlife fencing, leading to a high frequency of vehicular collisions with large mammals like white-tailed deer, which can weigh up to 300 pounds and cause fatal cabin intrusions in compact vehicles. Additionally, statistics from the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration indicate that a significant percentage of midnight wrong-way driving and erratic U-turn accidents on these highways involve drivers under the influence of alcohol. Like what you see? Subscribe to the Reddit Oracle for more. This happened about 15 years ago, but the memory is still burned into my brain like it was yesterday. I woke up super early one morning, completely ripped out of my sleep by the absolute worst headache I had ever experienced in my entire life. It felt like a physical spike was being driven straight through my skull. The pain was so intense and blinding that I knew immediately I was going to throw up. I dragged myself out of bed, trembling, and collapsed onto the cold tile of the bathroom floor. As I lay there, vomiting regularly into the toilet, I tried to rationalize what was happening. I assumed it was just a severe, sudden migraine because of the extreme nausea. But the blinding pressure behind my eyes didn't get any better. It was getting heavier, suffocating. Then, right in the middle of that physical agony, this incredibly strong, terrifying feeling suddenly hit me out of nowhere. It wasn't a logical thought, it was a chilling, crystal-clear realization. An unexplainable voice deep inside my head told me that if I didn't get to a hospital right that second, my 17-year-old son was going to walk into this bathroom when he woke up and find me dead on the floor. That sudden, desperate wave of pure maternal intuition gave me a final surge of adrenaline. I dragged my weak body up to my feet, using the walls for balance, and stumbled heavily down the hallway. I reached the door of my son's room, pushed it open, and used whatever breath I had left to tell him that I needed him to call 911 immediately, because something was terribly wrong. Right after that, everything went black. I managed to lay down on my bed, and that's when my body completely shut down. I learned much later in the emergency room that I had suffered a massive, violent seizure right after speaking to him. My poor son had to keep his composure and follow the 911 operator's intense instructions step by step to keep me alive until help arrived. The ambulance rushed to the house with its sirens wailing. They loaded me in and hauled ass to the hospital. The doctors ran immediate scans and discovered the horrific truth. It wasn't a migraine at all. I had a leaking brain aneurysm. If it had fully ruptured on that bathroom floor, I would have died right then and there at 49 years old. I am so incredibly glad I listened to that stubborn, desperate little voice inside my head. Cultural note. A cerebral aneurysm involves a localized abnormal dilation of a blood vessel within the brain, which places extreme pressure on surrounding neurological tissues. When an aneurysm begins to slowly leak prior to a catastrophic rupture, it often triggers what clinical medicine defines as a sentinel headache, a sudden, excruciatingly painful event frequently accompanied by severe emesis and subsequent tonic-clonic seizures due to acute intracranial hemorrhaging. My parents used to own this incredibly problematic old pellet stove. That thing was an absolute nightmare. Sometimes it would randomly produce a massive, deafening bang noise, and other times it would literally smoke screen the entire living room. And that was on a good day. Half the time it just refused to turn on at all. When they finally saved up enough cash to buy a brand new one, they made a terrible mistake. Instead of throwing the old hazardous stove into the trash, they decided to keep it and install it directly into the downstairs guest room. Their logic was that since the guest room was rarely used, the dangerous old stove wouldn't really pose a threat. It would just sit there, dormant. Then, December rolled around, and winter hit hard. My grandmother flew into town for the holidays, and my parents, being hospitable, gave her their master bedroom, choosing to sleep in the cramped guest room downstairs for a few days. For the first couple of nights nothing went wrong, but as the week went on, this intense, suffocating feeling of pure dread started building deep inside my gut. It wasn't a random thought. It was a persistent, terrifying intuition that it was only a matter of time before that old, broken pellet stove did something catastrophic. Every single nerve in my body was completely on edge. Right around midnight, the anxiety became too loud to ignore. I didn't even need a drink, but my subconscious forced me to get out of bed, walk downstairs, and check on them. As I walked down the dark hallway, my heart was pounding against my ribs. My gut told me to physically crack their bedroom door open just to be absolutely sure. The moment the door nudged open, my lungs immediately seized up. The room was completely thick with a heavy, blinding blanket of dark smoke. It was a pure nightmare. The air was so dense that I couldn't even see my parents sleeping in the bed. They were entirely engulfed in the toxic haze, completely unresponsive. "Hey, Mom? Dad?" I started yelling into the darkness, my voice cracked with pure panic. "You guys have to get out of there right now." Luckily, the sheer urgency in my voice managed to pierce through their heavy, oxygen-deprived sleep. They jolted awake, coughing violently, and stumbled out into the hallway, gasping for clean air. To be completely honest, with that massive amount of toxic smoke trapped in an enclosed room, I don't know if they ever would have woken up on their own. If I hadn't listened to that unexplainable midnight gut feeling that forced me to get up and check that door, my parents would have quietly suffocated to death in their sleep, right beneath my feet. Cultural note. Traditional biomass pellet stoves rely on an internal electrically powered induction fan to create a negative pressure vacuum that forces combustion exhaust out of the ventilation pipes. When older models suffer from poor maintenance, a sudden mechanical failure of the exhaust fan or a heavy blockage in the narrow flue pipe can cause a rapid backdraft, forcing toxic wood smoke and lethal odorless carbon monoxide directly into the living space within minutes. October 29, 2005. I was visiting New Delhi, India, checking out potential college campuses with my family. After a long, grueling day of academic tours, we had the following afternoon completely free. My parents immediately decided they wanted to do some classic sightseeing around the historic parts of Delhi. Honestly, I was in a terrible mood and absolutely didn't want to go, but they wouldn't hear it. I spent the entire day sulking, muttering to myself, constantly repeating, "I just want to go back to the hotel," while being dragged from one crowded tourist site to another under the heavy, suffocating heat. As evening approached, the traffic became unbearable. My mom and my aunt decided they wanted to stop at the famous Sarojini Nagar market to do some last-minute shopping for the upcoming Diwali festival. The market was a chaotic sea of thousands of people. My dad stayed behind in the rented van, babysitting me and my younger brother, while we waited parked right on the edge of the dense crowd. Right then, that annoying teenage sulking completely shifted. It transformed into this sudden, ice-cold, overwhelming wave of pure panic. The casual, "I want to go back" feeling turned into a terrifying, desperate thought screaming inside my brain, "We really need to leave this exact spot right now." But I was just a kid. Who was going to listen to me, right? Driven by this unexplainable, suffocating dread, I didn't just complain. I threw a massive, hysterical, uncharacteristic tantrum inside the van. I screamed, cried, and caused such a chaotic scene that my dad finally snapped. Annoyed and frustrated, he left the van and went straight into the crowded market to fetch my mom and aunt so we could finally leave. They returned to the vehicle furious with me, complaining about how I ruined their evening as we drove back to the hotel. The moment we walked into our room, my dad switched the TV on to check the local news. The screen cut to breaking live footage. The visuals showed the exact same Sarojini market we had just left, now completely covered in smoking debris, shattered glass, and absolute chaos. The screen showed a scene of total devastation, with sirens wailing through the black smoke and people running in pure terror. When the camera zoomed in on the center of the destruction, my entire family went completely numb. The exact, precise location where everything had been reduced to rubble and fire was the very spot where our van had been parked just minutes prior. Cultural note. On October 29, 2005, the city of New Delhi, India was struck by 3 coordinated bombings executed by a terrorist group in high-density commercial zones. The deadliest of the 3 detonations occurred at the packed Sarojini Nagar marketplace around 5:55 p.m., just 2 days before the major festival of Diwali. A bomb concealed inside a vehicle devastated the crowded shopping stalls, taking advantage of the massive holiday crowds, resulting in dozens of casualties and permanently altering security protocols across the capital region. I was out walking my dog, a beautiful, energetic pup named Loki. It was a typical afternoon along a narrow, isolated country lane deep in rural England. If you've ever been to these parts, you know exactly what they look like. There are absolutely no pavements, no sidewalks, just an extremely tight asphalt road bordered by massive, thick hedges, towering high on both sides. According to the UK Highway Code, you're always supposed to walk on the right-hand side, facing oncoming traffic. That way you can actually see a vehicle coming toward you before it's too late. So, following the rules, Loki and I were staying close to the right. We were approaching a long, sweeping right-hand bend in the road. The high hedges completely blocked my vision, making it an absolute blind corner. Suddenly, out of nowhere, this heavy, intense thought popped into my skull. I'd best move over to the left side right now. It didn't make much logical sense at the moment. I tried to rationalize it, telling myself, "Come on, no one is going to be driving along this tiny, forgotten road very fast anyway, but still, I'd better move over right this second." It wasn't a standard deduction. It was a sudden, stubborn, unexplainable urgency that gripped my chest. My gut absolutely refused to let me take another step on the right. I pulled Loki's leash, and we quickly hurried across the asphalt to the left side of the narrow lane. The exact microsecond my feet touched the opposite grass, a loud, deafening roar echoed through the trees. A modified hot hatch came flying around the blind bend, completely out of control. It was moving so incredibly fast that the metal body was literally brushing against the leaves of the right hand, hedged the exact spot where Loki and I had been standing just 5 seconds earlier. The car must have been pushing 60 miles per hour, racing blindly through a narrow single-lane country corridor. If I had hesitated for even a second or two, if I had stopped to scratch my head or check my phone, both Loki and I would have been completely wiped out, crushed against the dirt. If we had stayed on the inside of that bend, the sheer speed of that car would have left us with absolutely zero room for escape. It shook me up badly. My hands were trembling for the rest of the walk. It's terrifying to realize that not only did that random protective thought occur to me out of nowhere, but it arrived at literally the last possible second to prevent our lives from ending right there in the mud. Years ago, my friends and I were out at a local bar watching some live UFC fights. Whenever the main squad gets together, we always like to keep the party going. Our usual routine was simple. As soon as the regular bars started dying down around midnight, we would immediately hop over to the specific after-hours spot that stayed open until 4 a.m. It was our weekend ritual. No exceptions. That night, the plan was already locked in. We were all supposed to pile into a car belonging to a friend of a friend and make the drive across town to the 4 a.m. bar. Right as everyone was walking toward the parking lot, I told my buddy, the one who actually drove to the first bar with me, that I needed to stop by my own vehicle. I can't even remember if I had to grab something from the glove box or just lock it up. My buddy wanted to smoke a cigarette anyway, so we split from the main group and walked over to my car. Then right out of nowhere, this heavy, inexplicable feeling just hit me. It was like a sudden wave of physical exhaustion and this weird, deep-seated urge to just go home. I looked at my friend and asked him if he wanted to just grab some Denny's and call it a night. To my surprise, he immediately agreed. The thing is, I was always the guy who wanted to push the night to the absolute limit. It was completely out of character for me to back out of the after-party. I never called it a night early. Never. But I don't know what it was about that specific moment. It was just an intense gut feeling. The next morning, that same friend calls my phone. His voice was completely shaking. He asked me if I had heard what happened. The car we were literally about to ride and the one heading to the 4 a.m. bar had gotten into a horrific high-speed accident on the highway. The driver was killed instantly. I just sat there on the edge of my bed, completely frozen. I couldn't believe it. If I hadn't listened to that sudden random impulse by my car, we would have been sitting in those exact seats. Needless to say, never drink and drive. I live my life on a very strict, unforgiving clock. I have a lot of severe food allergies, and when I say severe, I don't mean a mild rash or a stomachache. I mean that if the wrong ingredient touches my tongue, I have exactly 15 minutes before I'm completely gone. Naturally, living like this has caused many near-death episodes, about 20-ish to this date to be exact. You get used to the constant state of hypervigilance, but you never truly get used to the terror. One afternoon, I was out cycling with a close friend. We had been riding for a while and decided to stop by a local spot to grab a quick bite. For some stupid, reckless reason, that specific day, I didn't have my emergency medications with me. No EpiPen, no rescue inhaler, Nothing. As soon as we sat down and took the first few bites, I don't even know how to explain it, but I immediately felt that something was off. A strange, heavy shift inside my body. My internal alarm started screaming. Deep down, I knew I shouldn't engage in any heavy physical activity. Running or cycling normally pumps your blood faster, which drastically worsens an allergic reaction by spreading the allergen through your system at lightning speed. But suddenly, something inside my brain just snapped. It was pure survival instinct. I grabbed my bike and started cycling toward my house as fast as humanly possible. Home was about 2 to 3 kilometers away. That ride was an absolute nightmare. I distinctly remember the horrific feeling of my breath slowly slipping away. Air was barely entering my lungs. My throat was tightening with every hard pedal. Then my sight started fading. My eyes were swelling up so fast that the world around me began to blur into complete darkness. I was suffocating and going blind at the same time, miles away from help. Somehow, through sheer adrenaline, I reached my building. I stumbled into the elevator and collapsed against the wall. By that point, I had completely lost sight in one eye. The other eye was almost done as well, just a tiny, blurry slit of light. I dragged myself through my front door, operating purely on muscle memory. I managed to reach my emergency inhaler. I forced the medicine into my lungs, breathing through it with what I honestly think were my last 5 to 10 breaths remaining. If the elevator had stalled for even 30 seconds, I wouldn't be here to tell this story. Later on, medical tests discovered the culprit. It turns out I am brutally, lethally allergic to corn. That afternoon, my friend and I had casually snacked on a handful of standard tortilla chips. A single chip almost ended my life. Cultural note: in the United States, corn-derived ingredients such as high fructose corn syrup, cornstarch, and corn oil are heavily integrated into the vast majority of processed foods, making a severe corn allergy one of the most difficult and isolating conditions to manage. Exercise-induced anaphylaxis is also a documented medical phenomenon where physical exertion accelerates the systemic absorption of an allergen, turning a mild exposure into a life-threatening emergency within minutes. If you like these stories, make sure to subscribe to the Reddit Oracle.